Yeah, so there's going to be a Q&A, so please, because I'm going to try and cover a reasonably large amount of material, but still inevitably leave a lot of things out. But if there's something you want me to come back to, or something to mention that's just on your mind about this topic in general, please remember it for the Q&A. Also, little caveat, if I seem a little bit zoned out, that's because I was arrived from Brazil yesterday, so... Great. Okay, so what I want to do is, I'm going to be basically focusing on a whole series of examples of policies that Israel has been practicing with regards to the Palestinians since 1948, both inside the area that people refer to as Israel proper, i.e. the territory that Israel has controlled up until 1967, and also Israeli policies towards Palestinians in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, West Bank including occupied East Jerusalem too. And at the end, I guess just provide some food for thought about ways of looking at the situation. I haven't included in my PowerPoint a section on what you guys can be doing about it, so that might be something that I'm obviously planting in the audience right now as a question that people can talk about in the Q&A. I wanted to, right at the beginning, just say something about the term apartheid itself, because even though people have been analysing Israeli policies within a framework of apartheid for quite some time now, I mean, you can find isolated journal articles or slightly obscure analysis like going back a long time, and it's become much more mainstream in some, I guess, in some areas to talk about Israeli apartheid in recent years. But even so, whenever you talk about it, and I don't know if you find this on campus yourself, you find a lot of objections to the term, to the application of the term, from different angles. And one of the angles is that it's suggesting that there is some sort of exact comparison with South Africa, and that can be a kind of a main objection that people level against whether it's relevant or useful to talk about Israeli apartheid. Like they say, well, the situation in South Africa and Israel since '48 is completely different for X, Y, and Z reason, and therefore you can't talk about it. It's not really relevant to talk about Israeli apartheid. People can make that objection non-seriously in terms of they're just saying it as kind of a propaganda point story, or people might actually make that point in a more constructive way because there are important differences. But I'm not going to be talking about. I'm not going into a detailed comparison now. The point I want to make is the fact that when people talk about Israeli apartheid, and it would be the same if you were talking about any other situation and the use of the term apartheid, we're not assessing its usefulness or applicability or not just because there are similarities along with South Africa. Because there is a definition of apartheid, and apartheid exists within different treaties and international conventions, independent of what happened in South Africa, although obviously owing a lot to it. This is how John Dugard put it, who served for a number of years as the UN's Special Rapporteur for Human Rights in the occupied territories, and he's also a South African legal scholar himself. And he wrote the foreword to my first book, Israeli Apartheid: A Beginner's Guide, and he put, "It is Israel's own version of a system that has been universally condemned." So that's kind of summarising the point quite well. And I don't know if anybody's, well, it's being recorded, I guess anyway, or if anybody's taking notes, but these are examples of where apartheid is kind of referred to or mentioned or condemned or described in different international treaties, okay? So you've got this one, I'm not going to bother reading it because it's really long, but you can see it up there. So you've got 1965, 73, an additional protocol to the Geneva Conventions too, and then most recently in the Rome Statute of the ICC in 1998. So in other words, all those things exist which talk about apartheid, and you can kind of look at how it describes apartheid and go, okay, well, is that applicable in a particular given situation? And I also just wanted to flag this up, if you can remember it or write it down, because it's useful. This Human Sciences Research Council is a think tank academic centre in South Africa. And in 2009, they published a report that looked at specifically the situation in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip in order to assess it from the point of view of kind of international law and political theory about whether it was colonialism and or apartheid. concluding that it was both. Okay, so I just wanted to make the general point that there is a body of work and literature in international law, in academic studies, that conclude, whether you agree or not, that has a definition of apartheid. You can apply it in the context of Israel-Palestine and say, okay, yeah, that matches, yeah, that doesn't match. And the comparison with South Africa is interesting, like I find it interesting, but it's not the main question when looking at whether it's okay to talk about Israeli apartheid. Okay, so with that in mind, I'm going to just kind of plough into some aspects of how Israel has regarded and treated the Palestinian population. I think instead of hopping around, I'm now just going to basically stay here, because I have to click this button quite a lot. This foundational act that established Israel meant the mass ethnic cleansing of the indigenous Palestinian population. The vast majority of all the Palestinians who would have been inside what then became Israel were expelled in 1948 in what the Palestinians refer to as Nakba, or catastrophe. That part of the history can't be emphasized enough, and it's written out of the history time and time again in many, many accounts of what has taken place in that country and that land over the decades. So you're looking at around 90% of all the Palestinians who would have been inside what then became Israel were expelled, and those refugees were prevented from returning. Okay, so in that sense they were all expelled, right? Whether some refugees were physically forced out at the barrel of a gun, whether some fled because it was because of the violence, but they were all denied the right to return to their communities. And those communities, hundreds of them, were demolished, were blown up by the Israeli army in order for new Jewish communities to be established, which I'll mention in a second. Okay? That is one of the key lenses through which to see everything that has happened in Palestine and Israel since then. Okay? That is the origin, in a way, of the Palestinian struggle. Not the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza in '67, which brought with it a whole other set of issues, but actually the Palestinian struggle in the beginning was the struggle of an expelled people and of a colonized people to return and seeking decolonization. I wanted to mention these three laws as well, because these three laws were passed just after, in a couple of years after the State of Israel's establishment: the absentee property law, the law of return, and the citizenship law. And again, without going into lots of details, what these laws were doing were making legislation by the new Israeli Parliament, the Knesset, saying all the property previously belonging to the Palestinian refugees who have been expelled, it becomes the custody of the state, which it can do what it wants with it, right, in terms of freeing it up to be used by Jewish citizens. And it also, those law of return was allowing Jews around the world to move to Israel, to emigrate to Israel, and the citizenship law was granting those Jews citizenship and also making sure, like by its wording, making sure that all the expelled Palestinians, of course, they couldn't physically return, but it also made sure that they would be denied citizenship at any rate. Okay, so it was denationalizing, taking away the citizenship of a large number of potential Israeli citizens, all of whom were Palestinian. And this is, again, a key shaping point to do with many aspects of how the situation has unfolded, but one that is missed out so often. Okay, the only reason why Israel has got a Jewish majority, which it talks about a lot from the point, which the government talks about a lot from the point of view of wanting to defend that majority, the only reason why that Jewish majority exists is because of the expulsion of the Palestinians and the continued denial of their right to return. That's pretty amusing, the filmers phone going off. Okay, first few years, as I kind of alluded to, you've got the legislation being passed that is affecting the mass land confiscation that's taking place with the Palestinians to the new state that is defined itself as a Jewish state. And you can see here the scale of what's taking place. Okay, so almost all of the new Jewish communities established in the first 5 years of the state's existence are being built on absentee Palestinian property. By the mid-70s, so sort of 30 years in, the average Palestinian community inside Israel, okay, remember we're not talking about, that's not including the West Bank and Gaza, That's just talking about Palestinians, the remainder who have stayed and received citizenship. Okay, but the average community from that minority inside the state had lost between 2/3 and 3/4 of its land, each village and town. If you think about the impact that that has on a community in terms of the ability to naturally grow, for the youth to desire to stay, etc., etc., many communities being rural or farming communities, at least initially, before many of the people were forced to go and seek cheap labour in the cities. 1 in 4 of the Palestinian citizens in Israel, almost 20% of Israel's population, in case anybody didn't know that, but 1 in 4 of them are what are called present absentees, which is a kind of internal displacement. But they're present absentees in the sense that they have also been denied the right to return to their property, even though they became citizens. Okay, so they were expelled or moved from their village to another village or another town in 48, but were still forbidden from returning to and having their lands restored to them until now. And it's an active issue for many of the Palestinians inside the 48 area in terms of campaigning, annual marches, and remember, many of them are minutes drive from their homes. Some of the homes are still standing and from their land. And since 48 until today, over 700 Jewish communities have been established within Israel's pre-67 borders, again not including settlements, which I'll mention, West Bank settlements, which I'll mention later, have been established, and none for the Palestinian citizens, with the exception of about half a dozen kind of shanty towns that have been established in Makam, in the Negev desert in the south. And the only reason they were established was in order to concentrate the Bedouin Arab population of Israel, who have largely